Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, former President Donald Trump today was found guilty on all counts in his criminal hush money trial. We will take a look at the legal and political aspects of this historic jury verdict. That's next on Arizona Horizon.
This hour of local news is made possible by contributions from the Friends of PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Former President Donald Trump today was found guilty on all 34 charges of falsifying business records tied to a hush money payment to a porn actress before the 2016 election. The 12-person jury came back with their verdict at the end of the second day of deliberations. Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. He's the only former U.S. president to be convicted of felony criminal charges. Trump was released after the verdict. There was no bail involved. A sentencing date has been set for the morning of July 11th, 4 days before the start of the Republican National Convention. After the verdict today, Trump called himself a, quote, very innocent man, and the proceedings a, quote, rigged trial and a disgrace. Joining us now to discuss this historic verdict is Roy Herrera, former Assistant U.S. Attorney General and former Assistant Attorney, I should say, and founding partner of Herrera Arellano Law Firm. And also joining us is Mark Ikonovich, former U.S. Assistant Attorney, not General, from the law firm Ballard and Spahr. All right, gentlemen, good to have you here. It's been a very busy day, and thank you both for coming in because we're looking for the legal insights and the legal aspects of all this. First of all, Roy, we'll start with you. Guilty, all 34, no split verdict here. It's a slam dunk. Were you surprised?
Not really. And I think it's important to just note that the criminal justice system worked the way it should, right? I mean, we have the prosecution who has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty. The defendant had an opportunity to defend himself. That's what Donald Trump had the opportunity to do. And obviously the jury agreed with the prosecution that he committed these crimes. Am I surprised? Not really. I mean, I think, and we'll probably get into the specifics of, the defense strategy here versus the prosecution strategy here, but I think that there were some flaws in what the defense tried to do here. And again, it didn't surprise me. I thought the testimony from some of the witnesses, like Michael Cohen, was pretty good for the prosecution. So as a result, this wasn't really a surprising outcome.
But again, Mark, we got 12 jurors here. You got 34 counts. It was, I thought, a relatively complicated case, although the prosecution kind of narrowed things down here. Not a split verdict, not one person wavering. And I was surprised. Were you surprised?
It's a resounding verdict. I don't know if I'm surprised because I think the evidence was very strong. There was a lot of good testimony, like Roy said. It was corroborated with documents and phone calls and photographs. The defense strategy, as Roy alluded to as well, was questionable, and I think some of that had to do with the defendant, arguing that, the relationship with Stormy Daniels never happened. Probably not the strategy to take when you're trying to establish your credibility. Why are you paying someone $130,000 if nothing happened? Those are hard things to sell to a jury, and juries, in my experience, are relatively wise, and we have a special, system of justice in this country, and in this case, I think it worked relatively well and relatively quickly.
And again, Roy, what happened here was he was found, all these counts, falsifying business records, having his extramarital affair, his fling, whatever it was over there. That's not what he was charged with. He was charged with it's always the cover-up, isn't it?
Well, it is, and this is a somewhat novel legal theory by the prosecution. It's a falsification of business records charge, which is normally in New York State a misdemeanor, and it became a felony because it was done in conjunction with or in support of another crime, the other crime being a violation of our campaign finance laws, because remember, this is all related to, paying these hush money payments so the story would go away in the eve of the 2016 presidential election. That's what made this a felony. That's why he is now, a convicted felon and facing, really, I think, up to 4 years in prison because of this guilty verdict.
Well, and again, as far as that is concerned, the timing of it, I think it was noted by the prosecution that the affair happened in like 2006 or something along those lines, but the money payment wasn't made until the eve of the election. You can't make it any more clear than that, can you?
It's pretty damning. I totally agree with you, Ted. The evidence was very strong, and the fact that you get jurors that both parties were able to have input into who the jury was going to be.
Yeah.
They were juries of their peers, and you had a judge overseeing this, instructing the jury, and they came to a quick conclusion on all 34 counts.
As far as the jury wanting to rehear the judge's instructions, what did you make of that?
That's relatively common. In a lot of jurisdictions, the jury is able to get a copy of the jury instructions. In New York, it's my understanding that that's not the case, and they just had to pay very close attention, and those are very complicated instructions. As a lawyer, it's difficult sometimes to parse exactly what the elements of the offense are, but that's what those are for, and they were taking their job seriously, and I think most juries do.
And the other note the jury wanted, Roy, was basically they wanted to rehear the testimony of Michael Cohen and the publisher, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. What did that tell you?
Well, I think, again, it kind of goes back to your question about whether I was surprised or not. I mean, the fact that they wanted to hear back the testimony of Michael Cohen, despite the defense's efforts to make Michael Cohen seem untrustworthy, he did hold up on cross-examination pretty well, at least from what I saw, and he was a credible witness from what I saw. And clearly, I think the jury believed that. But the moment they asked for that testimony, along with the fact that we got a verdict within 2 days of the closing of trial, really signaled to me the moment that I knew that the jury was coming back with the verdict that it was going to be guilty.
And Trump's defense, obviously, he did not take that. Did you think that was wise for him not to take the stand?
I think it would have been disastrous
Really?
for Donald Trump to take the stand. Yes, I think most lawyers counsel their clients not to take the stand. Donald Trump in particular would have been a horrible witness. Horrible.
Yeah, but what does that mean now? That means what? They would have taken 1 day instead of 2 days? I mean, he's convicted on all counts.
That's true. That's true. It can't get worse than
Couldn't
this.
get any worse than that.
But I think it can get worse in terms of sentencing. If a defendant takes the stand and lies while they're on the stand, that's itself a crime, committing perjury, and that's a risk for him.
That all or nothing defense on Michael Cohen, though, I mean, it sounds, as we referred to, it sounds like the jury believed what they heard from Michael Cohen. Was there no plan B with the defense?
It didn't seem that way. I mean, obviously, they had a very aggressive cross-examination of Michael Cohen as well as Stormy Daniels. Both of them, again, held up relatively well. You know, they tried to get Michael Cohen to sort of show that he had some sort of reason to lie here about what occurred. That obviously didn't happen. The same thing with Stormy Daniels. They tried to, get into her past and, sort of make her seem like she wasn't trustworthy because of her prior profession, things like that. And both of the witnesses held up pretty well, which I think, once that happened, put Donald Trump in a pretty bad position. I also will say, and I totally agree with my friend Mark here, which is that their emphasis on the idea that the actual affair didn't occur, I think was a real mistake, because I think it was pretty clear from the testimony, from the evidence, that it did occur. And the real question was there a campaign finance violation here or not? And that's really what they should have focused on.
Was the defense focused on an appeal? I mean, did they know they were kind of sunk here, and were they working toward the future?
I don't know. It can be difficult as a defense attorney to get outside of your bubble. And especially with a client like that, it can be very difficult to manage your client. And I think you saw that in the reporting that, the client was falling asleep at the counsel table. And, a lot of the strategies that they took, it looked like they were playing not to the jury, but to their client. And that's always a losing strategy.
That business of falling asleep, that business of attacking the judge. Again, we had Paul Charlton, former U.S. attorney here, and he was saying the juries, they like the judge. They trust the judge. They don't like it when people make fun of the judge or are abusive toward the judge. Was that a factor?
It's, the jury's not supposed to be able to see what's happening outside the courtroom in terms of the news reporting, but that antipathy and the mistakes made by the defense in terms of what was said during closing arguments regarding the not sending a man to prison based on Michael Cohen's testimony. And I totally agree with what Roy said too about Michael Cohen holding up relatively well. Going after the lawyer that your client chose to be his lawyer as a scumbag is also a very difficult argument, because as prosecutors always say when there's a conspiracy like this, that we didn't choose that person. The person that chose that, and that they put it especially well in this case, we didn't go to the witness store to choose Michael Cohen. Donald Trump chose Michael Cohen because he knew Michael Cohen was a scumbag. and was not going to tell the truth.
Yeah, interesting. All right, sentencing July 11th. Are they going to move that day? 4 days before the Republican National Convention. Could that be moved?
I don't think it will, because it seems like all the parties were comfortable with that date. The real question again is, in a normal world, if he gets prison time, would he be, remanded to prison immediately? Obviously, I don't think that's going to happen in this case, because he's got to go to the Republican National Convention. He's got to run a presidential campaign. So if there is prison time, he doesn't have to get prison time, mind you. He could also get probation. But if there is prison time, it's likely to start at some later date, and that's all going to get worked out.
Who decides the sentencing? Jury, judge? Who decides?
The judge.
The judge. So it is the judge.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Again, factors like contempt. The judge did know what Donald Trump said. The judge was aware of his behavior when the jury was out of there. Does that factor into sentencing?
I think it does, and I think it rightly does. What you consider at sentencing, or what judges are supposed to consider at sentencing, are both the factors that were involved in the crime that was the crime of conviction, in this case 34 counts, and the other factors are the individual factors of the defendant and whether this defendant poses a likelihood of reoffending. And this judge gave very stern warnings to the defendant, in this case, former president, to not say things out of school and not say things out of court about the witnesses and about the judge and about the judge's family. In this case, Donald Trump was attacking not just the judge, but the judge's daughter. That doesn't play well, and that doesn't show sort of someone who's learned their lesson about having their first experience in the criminal justice system.
And yet, a first-time nonviolent criminal. Does that play? Again, no remorse, no regret, but first-time nonviolent. What do you think? Is he going to get prison time?
So that's another factor here, as Mark mentioned in the sentencing, is obviously prior criminal history, of which Donald Trump has no prior criminal history. I think the judge has gone out of his way in appearing to be fair. I think he understands the larger implications of the case. At least that's what it looks like. And in things like, for example, like the gag order that very clearly Donald Trump has violated multiple times during the trial. In a normal case, the defendant would be probably thrown into jail for those violations. The judge didn't do that. And I think it's largely because I think he's trying to appear as much as possible, given the public nature of this case, to be fair.
Yes.
And so I don't think that even the things about being combative with the judge and other things like that are going to play a real factor here. The judge is going to make sure that at least they don't appear to be a major factor here or any factor here. As he does the sentencing, I think he's going to stick to what he has to under the sentencing rules.
Is that gag order still in place?
I believe so, through sentencing, I would
Through
believe.
sentencing. Okay, well, good luck with that. Last question. We got to get out of here. And Mark, we'll let you take this one. Do people understand how historic this day is? This is a former United States president criminally convicted.
Yeah, it is remarkable. It takes my breath away in a lot of ways that we're sitting here and he's the anticipated nominee for the Republican Party. He's now a convicted felon, and he's awaiting sentencing on these very lurid charges, as you outlined, relating to fundamental issues of character. And as the prosecution pointed out in their closing, this isn't just a matter of a white-collar, run-of-the-mill offense, but this is an offense that possibly helped him get the presidency by keeping this very lurid story out of the news at the time. And what a different world we would be in had Donald Trump not won in 2016.
Legal Minds, Mark Ikonovich and Roy Herrera, a good discussion. Good to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining. We continue our coverage of today's historic verdict against former President Donald Trump, who was found guilty on all 34 felony counts of falsifying business records tied to a hush money payment to a porn actress before the 2016 election. We've looked at the legal aspects of the verdict, but what about the political fallout? For that, we welcome Chuck Coughlin, President and CEO of High Ground Consulting. Chuck, always a pleasure. Good to have you here. Holy smokes, what a day. Political ramifications of all this.
Well, we all know it's going to be a close election, right? I mean, that's true. And so the ramifications of this on that very small portion of the electorate that's out there that doesn't have a committed position on this race yet is interesting. I mean, from a professional background, the old line is all publicity is good unless it's followed by convicted or indicted. Well, you got 34 convictions today. That's not great.
Does it ramp up the anger and the division
Yeah.
in politics? Does it add fuel?
Undoubtedly. I mean, it'll be a Trump strategy to milk this in what they call like hardcore Republican precincts. You'd want to identify non-traditional voters that have not been participating historically in the process and make them believe, as he will articulate, that this is all a ruse, it's all a setup, it's all part of the game, and they've set it up against me, and you need to help me stop this. I'm a martyr.
And he's already said after the verdict, he said he's trying to link this to the Biden administration.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, does that message hit, and will that message start to fade over time?
I don't think he's going to let it. I like you just said in a second ago, the sentencing is going to be 4 days before the Republican National Convention.
Yes.
So he's going to ride this. I mean, he's going to use this throughout the cycle to try and drive that base voter turnout and to turn out people who are traditionally non-affiliated voters who buy into this everything's corrupt, everything's bad narrative, which has helped him substantially.
So that's how he responds. I mean, the judge is biased, the jury is biased, the prosecution's biased, everyone's biased against me. They're all against me. Okay, we get that. But the Republican Party in general, how does the party respond?
Well, I mean, I just saw a post from Karen Taylor, fully on the Trump side, fully engaged in parroting his narrative. And so that is today's Republican Party. Today's Republican Party is Donald Trump's Republican Party. It's a gang it's the MAGA gang, and they're here and they occupy that power of space. I wouldn't expect any deterioration from the GOP base at this point. I would expect them to follow exactly what Trump's comments were today.
So their presumptive candidate is a convicted felon. Let's raise the banner high.
Yeah, it's all set up against me. I'm a martyr. This is all the Democrats and big government and the deep state trying to come after your guy.
How do Democrats deal with this?
That's a big question. That's an interesting question. There are almost so much information here that the Democrats can use. I think what we will end up seeing is a lot of this. We will see a lot of this in the paid narrative of the Biden campaign. But I'm not sure that's going to be really helpful to them. I mean, if I were them, what I would be doing is talking about a better America. I would be talking about a better promise for America, that our economy is going strong, our country is great, our educational system is second to none in the world. I would hit all of the highlights of what's great about America.
But I mean, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how'd you like the play? I mean, you're running against a convicted felon.
And we all know it.
Yeah. So in other words, don't pile on.
Yeah, I think that's going to be part of the media narrative. It's going to be part of his narrative. It's going to be part. I mean, it can be like an intro and maybe a bit of an exit, but it can't be the body of the message.
Yeah.
If I want to be a successful Democratic campaign, I got to give those, remember who we're talking about here.
Right.
We're talking about the very small portion of the electorate that is yet to decide how they're going to vote on this. And so I want to talk to them. I want to talk to them about their life, about what they want, and how I can help them get that.
We talking independence here?
Yeah, we're talking about independents. We're talking about younger voters. We're talking about people who aren't super high efficacy voters. Not me and you, not most of your listeners,
Right,
people who are watching this show. It's going to be low propensity voters who typically turn out in a presidential election. Remember that a presidential election typically gets about a 15-point bump in turnout over a midterm election, a gubernatorial election, largely because younger voters turn out and surround those of us who always turn out.
I should mention the Biden campaign, like minutes after the verdict, the campaign and it released a statement, convicted felon or not, Trump will be the Republican nominee for president.
Yeah.
That's as far as you go on something like that?
Well, I think at this juncture, I would tread it pretty carefully right now because you got a lot of time. You got a lot of time to figure out how this rolls out. The news media cycle, like we're sitting in right now, is going to be talking about this. and they're going to be running this narrative for some time without his help. So it's probably good for a presidential campaign to sit back and watch how this narrative plays out, and then figure out how to curate it to your advantage.
And we should talk, CNN had their poll of polls released actually today, and Biden and Trump were even up. But 70% of registered voters in this one said nothing will change their vote. This was before the verdict. Yeah,
right,
but this basically is what you're saying. Nothing will change my vote.
Yeah, most of the country's locked in on this. I mean, that's why we see in poll after poll right now that it's one way or the other. It's 1 or 2 points, one way or the other, depending on, the old adage, the only poll that counts is the one on election day.
Right.
And you got to play to that point in the cycle. You got to play the long game here to figure out how you're going to frame this issue all the way through the cycle.
What about Arizona politics? We'll start with the U.S. Senate race. Does this help or hurt Kari Lake?
I would say it has an opportunity, again, to talk about those non-traditional voters. So Arizona is a growth state. We have a lot of new residents moving in here all the time. They are typically not voters. They're typically not high efficacy voters. And so in a growth state, what you'd want to be able to think about is getting to those voters who have not been part of the Arizona political experience to date, get new registrants, talk about people who don't have a long history of voting, and say, we have to defend him. He's a martyr. He's the sacrificial lamb. He's here for you. That narrative that we hear from Trump all the time. And if I'm them, that's what I do. I'd play that narrative in what you call these heavily Republican precincts, heavily Republican counties, where you can drive up a number.
And the Gallego campaign says and does what?
Man, if I'm Rubin's campaign, I'm doing the same thing I'm doing right now. I'm talking about my bootstraps to where I am today story, my service to my country. I talk about, what you can do better for Arizona, what I can do and what I will do for the betterment of all Arizonans.
Is this something that, if for both sides, for Republicans and Democrats running for office, you don't necessarily need to mention it because it's like a low-grade fever. It's always there.
It's like the color of the paint in the room, right?
Yes.
It's there, and it's going to be there, and you can play with it depending on what the audience is doing, what day, what you're going to be talking about. I mean, you could end a speech pretty easily by saying, look, who do you want as a leader? Do you want a leader who wants to do X, Y, and Z, or somebody who's got 34 felony counts? I mean, Walter Payton has a better record. He's number 34.
He's number 34.
Yeah, and so, I think there's a lot of jokes you could make about it. There's a lot of things you could talk about, but I don't know that I dwell on it as part of my hardcore part of my narrative.
And state legislative races, does it even factor at all in something that local?
Oh, maybe a bit, but again, it's on the margins. Everybody's running their own campaigns here. Everybody's running in their own district makeup. There's only 4 or 5 swing seats in the entire state that will be experiencing a competitive general election. That will be determined by the overall turnout in the cycle. I mean, the other thing, I got a billboard from a friend the other day going, most Americans would agree we'd vote to change everybody for president. We want none of these people. So that's another question is, what does this do in the overall turnout? I mean, Trump's going to want to use it to turn it up. Biden's going to want to make it more aspirational. What does this do to the overall turnout? You and I have discussed this before. Is this an opportunity where, people go, none of the above.
I can't take it anymore.
I'm going to vote for the abortion rights initiative, and I'll vote for some of these other people on the ballot, but I'm done here.
Yeah, and other things on the ballot could be affected. Last question, got about a minute or so left here. We're talking, how's this going to, we don't know. We've never been here, Chuck. This is this is the presumptive presidential candidate as a convicted felon.
Bust out the popcorn, Ted.
Yes,
it's the first ring of the circle today.
But is it something?
It grows more in intensity.
Is it? Oh, yes. But is it something that history books will? Is it something that we will look back on, or is it such? Is he such an anomaly? Is this such an anomaly that it's a speed bump and we'll move on?
You have people that are better at history than me. I fancy myself. You got Andrew Jackson and the impeachments there. You got all the stuff during Reconstruction, all of those very intense periods in our history where these types of things happen. I sort of put it in that But you know, the steroids we're on today with social media, the 24-hour or the 10-second media cycles we're in now. You know, it is amazing to see how this will play out. But I want to keep everybody thinking about who's this really going to play with, and how's it going to play with the cheap seats?
Yeah. Chuck Coughlin, High Ground, great insight. Good to have you here as always. Thanks, you, sir.
Ted. It's a pleasure.
And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Support for Arizona PBS comes from viewers like you and from
Arizona Theater Company at Tempe Center for the Arts presents True West, Sam Shepard's Pulitzer finalist and Tony-nominated play about brotherly love and sibling rivalry